substance equals spin. The propaganda's a win, stress feeding on my tension. My countrymen, they love their fiction. Words are now, it's made with good intentions.
I figured it out. I figured out how to press the record button in 2025. Here we are, folks. With one of 200. New year, new us. Not much different, honestly. Who are we kidding? Same old shit. Politics and media. Maybe a little bit of pop culture. What's happening in the discourse? What's happening in the news? And how do we respond to it? How do we make sense of it? Because it's a fucking mess. I'm joined by my co-hosts. Simone, how are you?
I am doing okay. I'm trying to figure out how to balance cereal, which I haven't had for many years, with holding this microphone because I do have a scissor arm here while I'm cat sitting. However, due to a mix-up at the screw factory, I don't have the right fitting to put this microphone on it. So I'm
Well,
holding it like a stand-up.
we value your work. And also joined by Ginny. How are you?
Fine. Completely normal. Happy. Not seething at all.
Fantastic. And what are you not seething about?
Definitely not seething about the fact that multiple people this week have contacted me about something they know that I hate, which is Christopher Nolan's Odyssey. That's going to send me into a spiral. This is the same week that I found out about the plot of the latest Indiana Jones movie, which involves time traveling and Archimedes and going back to the Battle of Syracuse and Mads Mikkelsen Mads Mikkelsen the person. I'm sure he's not a Nazi. Mads Mikkelsen playing a character of like a Nazi who thought Hitler wasn't extreme enough. There's just a lot going on. I've just been bombarded by things that I hate this week, mostly in the realm of film and TV. So
Hey, look, it's unlucky for you. Incredibly unlucky for you. It's been really interesting, like the last few weeks with the Odyssey stuff showing up, and you're never sure what is like fake engagement or not. Like the entirety of, I think, Twitter, but maybe a couple of other social media spaces as well, getting angry about a an Odyssey translation, an Iliad translation from last year
uh,
for being an iambic pentameter. And you're like, is this just like part of SEO boosting the upcoming Christopher Nolan Odyssey? Is this getting ahead of that now to like start rage baiting for any of the woke DEI choices that are made by Christopher Nolan? I mean, here we are fucking talking about it. But it's really absurd to see this rage machine like gear itself up every time. Like, no, that's my Western civilization, and we're not going to have any of this whatever shit we decide as a target this time around. It's getting really trite and boring, honestly. Not that it was anything other than that.
I don't believe that this is like the there's a trans girl in my 5-year-old kid's like foot race. People don't care about this. I don't believe that you care about Greek translations. I really don't. I can read New Testament Greek and I don't give a fuck. You don't give a fuck. I know you don't. Shut up.
This is the thing, right? Like, none of these people, like, I don't even know how many of these people are real at this point, given the proliferation of like botting and shitty junk AI. They're just setting dogs on stuff to try and
I
get some
don't
kind of
think
rise.
I know that you're kind of half joking, but I don't think that this is like a Chris Nolan marketing thing. It arose out of that, what do you call it, announcement where people were then discussing about like the Odyssey itself on Twitter and becoming Wikipedia experts in 5 minutes about it so that they could have opinions about it. And then somebody discovered that there was a relatively recent translation, well, a newer one than Fagel. And then they were like, this one actually, it's in too simple a language, question mark. It's not like, doesn't sound like Tolkien enough, I guess. I don't know. Like, I don't have strong opinions on it, but I think there should be a proliferation of many different kinds of translations, given that translation is an art form, not a science. Like, why do you care that this exists? It doesn't make your life any worse. But apparently, it's something to do with like, which way Western man, the loss and the decline of the civilization or something.
Yeah, I think it's in part on similar lines. It's to do with that particular translation being by a woman, right? Yeah,
In part, I'm sure, yeah.
it's really
To be
embarrassing.
fair, and not to get to that, to do it, to be Philip about this and a centrist
You don't have
about
to do it.
this.
You don't have to fucking do it.
Her whole like it used to be a thing in the kind of like late 2000s 2010s, and I think we've swung so reactionary that we seem to have slightly forgotten this, but it used to be a thing where it was like part of a marketing thing to do, for want of a better term, and again, I don't like this because of the baggage, but I don't have a better term, liberal idpol, right? To be like, the boys who are, like nasty won't like this one because it's empowering. And like, she did, to be fair, have a lot of paratext around whatever the term is, around her translation, sort of explaining like, well, all the men who've looked at it have overlooked this because they're men, but I have a different perspective. And this is true. It is a different perspective to translation, but the publisher definitely pushed that angle. And a lot of the cultural writers at the time definitely pushed the angle, right? That like, this is somehow morally better for you to like be a liberal and read this translation kind of thing. Like the kind of really ridiculous corporate sort of whitewashed form of politics, right? And so the backlash is there, but also they knew what they were playing into with it as well and trying to create it, because the kind of quote unquote culture war, which we've dissected in the past, was previously not only a detriment, but also a benefit that outweighed that detriment for a lot of companies and for a lot of, people who are selling things in the capitalist market, right? Which is why it used to be that shops would do like Pride Month kind of collections, which they've now stopped doing because the pendulum has swung the other way and fascism is on the rise. And so it's no longer as profitable, right, for corporations to pretend to have this kind of identitarian politics.
It's pretty it's one of the many concerning things about capitalism, especially under like the rampant neoliberal version we currently have, how profit motive directly impacts and constructs a discourse, as well as the material reality around it, right? Like, I think the weirdest thing is how, this translation was from 2023. Like, it's not even new news, right? And I can't remember there being like this much air quotes anger about it back when it first came
Sorry,
out.
is this the Emily Wilson
Yeah,
translation?
it's Emily Wilson, Elliot.
Okay, because that came out in 2017. I just want people to know.
I thought it was a redo.
It's 2010s one, isn't it?
So I remember people writing about
No,
that
the
when I
Odyssey
was.
came out in 2017, but the Iliad came out in 2023.
Oh, okay. So wait, so we are talking about the
Oh, so
Odyssey
she
now or
went
the
on to do the
Iliad?
Iliad.
I think we're talking about the Iliad because they were talking about Agamemnon.
Okay.
No, we were talking about what? When?
No, no, no.
Everybody was
I'm
talking about
talking about the
everybody
discourse.
was
I'm talking.
taking a crack at the opening lines of the Odyssey.
What are they all doing then? Why are they going all the way back?
Yeah, so like the Odyssey came out in 2017 because I was still online when it came out and I remember all the Vox articles about it. And I do agree with what Simone was saying, is that it was definitely pushed at the time as like men have done it this one way and now here's a woman doing it this way. But for it to be picked up again in the discourse like 7 years later, to me, I mean, that's just like, we're all over it now. Like, I'm sure since 2017 there have been two further academic translations of this text. At
Okay, so
least.
there was an Iliad that was published 2023, 2024.
Okay.
So look, that's how you know we've got your back, audience of ours. We're gonna fact check ourselves
Yeah.
live on podcast.
I do find it interesting for somebody to say, all the men have said the sirens are sexy. The sirens are not sexy. You would not swipe, which is the one where you pick them, left?
I don't know. You're talking to someone who doesn't know.
I don't know. So whoever does, who's swiping? I'm doing crowd work because I've got the stand-up mic.
Who up swiping?
Who's swiping? Who's swiping? Hey, yeah, you two together? Oh, your brother and sister? Oh, you better watch out. You look it. We're white.
No,
Anyway,
I
keep
mean,
going.
look, I have my own like issues with the text, not from like a woman translated it way, but like there are some turns of phrase that I think interpreted in a way that I wouldn't. But like that's translation though, right? Is like I'm not the arbiter of whether or not Odysseus should be portrayed to be more or less misogynistic. That's not my, I didn't write this book. I didn't I didn't materialize this content. Like there are probably well over like 20 live or existing or recognized translations of this work for a reason, at the very least, and like we've been adapting this to other media properties since what, 1911, since the silent film era. Like, I don't think that a point of difference in these translations should be a make or break thing. But so it is really hilarious to me to read some of this critique. I say critique with air quotes in the year of our Lord 2025/2024 over not even, I guess, the material of the translations. Like, if you bother to read any of these, like 100 or 150 slightly altered, mostly copy and pasted critiques of this translation, they all boil down to one thing in particular, and it's essentially like a critique based entirely around the author's gender, and not to do with the substance of the text itself. I can guarantee you that Redneck 667 has probably never fucking read an original translation of the Odyssey or can fathom what the Odyssey is about.
Classism, Ginny.
They don't know what an
Classism.
iamb is. Like,
Look,
they're like, it's supposed to be dactylic hexameter. You look that up on Wikipedia. You don't know what a dactyl is in English. You don't know what it is in Homeric Greek, for that matter. You don't understand how like pitch accent versus stress accent works. Fuck you.
It's really interesting though, and something that we've
I have a gun to your head. Explain these diacritic marks right now.
something we've been able to use, I guess, while we've been doing this podcast and associated media enterprises, to I think a pretty successful degree, is looking at how the discourse is moving, what is being targeted, and then being able to make predictions based on that stuff. And we've seen this rise of, what do you call it? I don't want to use the term Western chauvinism, because I get into all kinds of hot water for saying that, and the current geopolitical climate, but for historic Western, and I think you need to air quote that yet again, content, like media, history. This has been going for like the last 2 decades, coming out of like people kind of memeing about the Crusades, right? Yeah, like it was this whole little like fucking meme industry for a while, and then like, arguably
they're called Cantabrians, Kyle.
Well, right, we had our own little thing here about it where they try to get people to change the name of the Crusaders rugby team.
Yeah, trying to get people from Christchurch to be less racist. Good luck.
And then that kind of has morphed through Gamergate, and Sad Puppies, like kind of discourse attacks on the Hugo Awards, and just kind of dragging people along with it, but this consistent track. And you've got it like today with I guess it's been more monetized, more productionized, with people like Douglas Murray and other fucking fascists, because that's what these people are. Like they're people dressing themselves up in kind of pseudo-liberal academic kind of debate language,
Douglas
while trying
Murray,
to
bell curve guy.
I don't know, maybe.
Hold on.
He's like the journalist and writer journalist who like hangs out with Barry Weiss and stuff, and like talks about the decline of Western civilization, how we have to take it back and go back to norms.
Sorry, that's Charles Murray. I was wrong.
Oh, okay. Oh, you mean, yeah, right. And then you got people like Peter Thiel like funding these kind of like moves towards like bringing an older politics back. Like we need to return to the Greek meaning of democracy.
Yeah, fucking another man in the ass.
Okay.
I'm not sure that was the meaning of democracy.
I mean, yeah, I honestly think that to me.
In the off, I don't, Kyle. I can't read the vases. I'm not a classicist. I think they were playing pool. One of them.
Look, I mean, this is something which like we think about occasionally occasionally we think about this in advertising too, right? Like, not to sound like a shittier Don Draper about it.
You think about which part, Ginny? Which part?
No,
Spending all day thinking about old man Yahweh.
No, we're not thinking about that. But if HelloFresh wants a campaign like that, you know what? No, don't.
Yeah. Fucking Don Draper voice, like, It's Hanagram.
It's Hanagram. No, well, okay. We shan't be putting Hanagram on television or on people's YouTube ads. But I think that this kind of programming is like not to be like super on the nose and say like bread and circus and stuff, but like it's very reminiscent of, I feel like 1980s USA recession programming, where it's like you want stuff which shows you the glory of a past empire, right? Or like gives you a solution or a story where man conquers lawlessness because of the severe economic downturn and despair of the general population. So we had like a really big like boom in like Westerns in the 1980s. They like pretty much did away with what they considered to be quote unquote highbrow drama programming and just went, here's a huge set, someone is Caesar. You know what I mean? Like that sort of thing. And I feel like we're kind of headed that direction now, whereby in the past 2 years, past year and a bit, we have had so many revisits to that particular time of the world. We have had terrible Netflix shows which touch on that sort of stuff occasionally. We had a huge HBO, I think it was a series with Anthony Hopkins last year, entirely about the Empire. And obviously we have Odyssey coming out. There's also a Ralph Fiennes movie about Odysseus coming out very soon, which is not in the same vein, not like a propaganda trad values movie, but that this topic and this content is super, super popular at the moment. And I can sort of see that only escalating as conditions get worse for people around the globe. And people are like, wow, real life sucks. We need to watch or to be surrounded by material where the human spirit triumphs over everything because of violence. Like,
Yeah.
you know, it's just that
Yeah.
it's just a cycle again of programming.
I'm glad to be ahead of the curve because I did last year a parody version of Ronald Reagan's It's Morning in America ad campaign about how Ronald Reagan has the right of prima nocta because he's the president. So, glad to be ahead of the curve. There are a couple of things that I wanted to talk about that are threads that I think you picked up on, Kyle, and then pivot to a question. If I can remember these, I should make notes for myself as I'm going. And the first is like, you're absolutely right. There is this kind of thing about like, at a first level of analysis, right? Is Barbie feminist? Is MasterCard my friend? You know, like that kind of thing, right? And the answer is no, Barbie's not a feminist text. Secondly, at that sort of second order level, and so I think, you know, the question about whether or not like a translation is, oh God, and I hate to contribute to the variation of words, but actually we play in a language that, you know, the people who set the terms don't actually care about because they have the right to play, right? You know, is X translation woke? You know, as a question that can be asked now, when grammatically that would make no sense, or even just, you know, semantically it would make no sense not too long ago. And it shouldn't make sense, but we all understand what that means because we play in that discursive playground now. Our repertoires of meaning, right, are
We're fucking
there
forced
to draw
to.
upon. These scripts that everybody, social scripts that everybody keeps like rattling through on Twitter at light speed, and because all the journalists are on Twitter, this diffuses through osmosis into the wider mainstream, yeah, and that's sort of worrisome in a way. But there is also that, I mean, what Ginny was talking about, I think this kind of wider, why does the superstructure look this way, right? Like, why do people ask, is Barbie feminist? And then there is another split and another side where people ask, like, is this DEI woke? And I think that we should talk about the H-1B visa sort of split among, apparent split among the right debacle, again, because there's been some further stuff and also some, you know, like violence that's happened in the metropole a little bit later in this podcast. But there is that split on the other side as well, that they also have their own like cultural policing, the kind of 4chan friends or whatever, you know, the groypers. Like they do have their own purity tests and so on and so forth. And it's kind of fascinating to watch all of this in a way that's kind of, you know, horrifying at the same time, like a slow motion car crash. But in respect of the Odyssey in particular, and I am curious about like talking about, yeah, the sort of superstructural reflection, like you were talking about, Jenny, that grows out of it. Like, you know, for example, Westerns, and I'll be interested to see if those come back in a bigger way, since Clint Eastwood's probably going to die soon. He's doing courtroom dramas. But Westerns themselves, just to digress very quickly, are very interesting. I think about John Guelty's The Six Gun Mystique is a sort of analysis of it. It's really fascinating that there is an entire genre of such mythology in the Barthesian sense that we know what is like quote unquote accurate costuming or gun or something for a genre where the historical events didn't take place, don't exist, and the entire thing's made up. Like, it's really interesting that you could have people criticize, like, why is there a black cowboy or something when those people didn't exist, right? Like, it's fascinating that there's an entire genre of an entire historical genre which is just made up. Like, none of it happened. Absolutely none of it. Not even joking. Americans didn't own guns. The West was cleared by the US Army, slaughtering Native Americans. There weren't like these Lone Ranger people, like quote unquote cowboys, as the name suggests, tended to herds. That's what they did. And there were often people who lived on the margins, like Mexican people coming into America or, black people. But by and large, the sort of even idea of American gun ownership is quite recent within several decades, right? It's a 20th century phenomenon born out of advertising. So the fact that there's this entire genre which doesn't exist, which we can harken back to, I think really draws on what we were talking about. Maybe it was last time we did an episode about invented tradition, right? And I think that is the key word, kind of extrapolating from what Ginny was talking about going forward, right? This is one of the critical parts of fascist cultural production, especially, in the age of mechanized kind of production, or in the age of, and I think we should update Benjamin's work to discuss the idea of automated production, like fully automated AI slop, right? Like, this is perfect for fascism and its cultural production, because you don't even need to, you bypass, well, you can't really bypass the labor because it does involve the labor of people in the global south, which is invisible, but you can bypass a lot of it, right? That you used to be able to do. They no longer even need to have talent. You no longer even need to have futurists who can sculpt Mussolini's face in 360 degrees, because you can just put a prompt in, right? None of this is necessary. And so, like, the creation of slop, which kind of draws on the wealth of 20th century visual media, which portrays these Barthesian mythologies like the Western. I think that this is going to proliferate even more than just, and in ways that are more complicated and complex than just, this will make the liberals mad, and it's a photo of like a like a white family where they're all blonde and Mormon, but they also look like related in a way that's kind of too consanguine. You know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff where like the wife looks like the sister of the husband, which, not to knock it, I'm sure that, that is true of a lot of Mormons, but that kind of thing, right? Like, we're going to see this more complicated thing grow out of it, where we're seeing full stories actually, sold on the market, which are like this, which primarily use that kind of AI, and that kind of art in the age of automated mechanical production, or not almost non-mechanical electronic production, right?
You've seen it coming back as well with Tradcath, like Trad Wife, kind of return to the village, return to the fields content over the last 2 or 3 years, especially as the situation in Ukraine was heating up, even before Russia's invasion, as like stuff was happening in Europe. And then you even had, during the EU elections, politicians like Ursula von der Leyen directly appealing to it in their fucking video appeals, where she's like walking through the fields kind of shit, and like and back at her like rustic European village, like
she's a descendant of Nazis, by the way, like literal high-ranking Nazis.
Yeah. It's really interesting to see how they're able to play into it, and how little like immediate criticism there is of that. And again, at least this is all imagined stuff, right? Like, this is, back in the 1800s, people were not living fantastic lives, folks.
And we're going to go back to that with the removal of vaccines. Like, the polio vaccine might
This is all part of it.
We're going to be dying
horrifying
of the plague in a field somewhere, and we're going to be like,
I don't want to have an Oregon Trail death. What are you talking about?
It's like, well, at least I'm in this cornfield wearing, how lucky I am to be wearing this blue sundress in a cornfield. while I don't know, like my cousin husband dies of malaria again. Like it's just
Again.
And say what you will about Nolan. Interstellar taught us that cornfields suck and you should want to get off the earth because of cornfields.
it's just so
And
bizarre.
to leave Timothée Chalamet behind.
Like I don't believe that media that we consume should speak to some deeper human truth. Like, like I'm watching anime out here. Like, I don't obviously give a fuck about the deeper human truth or whatever.
Excuse me. I think we're gonna have a fucking
Whoa.
live argument on the podcast about that.
If you could see the shit I was watching.
No one wants to
No.
see it.
Reincarnated as the toe grip between my little underage sister's toes is not like
No,
that
I
doesn't
would
speak to some
never,
deeper
I would
truth.
never watch that. Okay, first of all,
Now I'm a slime in a dungeon that's getting put into a pot cooked by Laios or whatever.
no, I have so many. The fact that I wanted to correct you on the name of the second one and not like protest the material is actually just so concerning for me. Look, it's just I don't think that media has to even at all remotely reflect our changing societal times. But I just think it's so almost like disingenuous, or almost like you're deliberately, willfully ignorant to think that the kind of stuff that gets made and produced and watched isn't intended to have a cultural effect, right? Like I think that people that think that you're crazy for attributing some quote unquote hidden deeper meaning to a proliferation of like Mormonesque influences, becoming more famous, or like movies, or like a rise in the number of movies that are about Christianity being made, for example, and how that's like your salvation or the path forward. Like if you think that people are not creating media products in a vacuum, and so I think it's fine for them to be whatever drivel they end up being, but I think it is one thing to know that and to just go, okay, cool, that's media swings and roundabouts. It's another thing to sort of like bury your head in the sand and be like, oh, like who cares? Like it doesn't mean anything. Like there is a clear agenda which is proliferated by people who have agency and power in the world, right? And those people control the media levers in our society, whether that's news broadcasting or a Hollywood studio or even like a broadcast studio in fucking China or like in Singapore. Like, like people are making the propaganda sausage in every single fucking country. And to kind of believe that your Nolan movie is exempt from that discourse is kind of naive of you, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we see a lot of historical drama that didn't used to be the case even in China. And I think part of that is because the production logics have increased and the production values have become a lot more expensive. And so you can do that, right? Whereas you couldn't necessarily do it. You used to have to do like janky Monkey King in front of the green screen, which I've seen way too much of that. But I think that it's kind of different, which is interesting. That's a lot more like the project of nation building, right? Like the China dream is about like the people within these borders. We are all one nation. You are all citizens. You exist under the state apparatus, which is like the thing that binds us. And also, there's an unbroken 5,000 years of history. What the Shenyun thing, except it's done by the Chinese state, right? Like there's a contiguous kind of history through the Chinese Communist Party is the next kind of stage of development from like these historical dramas. We're all the same people all the way through. This kind of like it's a unifying narrative, right? Like this is kind of China's doing like 19th century nationalism, like Prussian nationalism, whereas in America, like right, it's total AI slop. But nevertheless, you're totally right. It is that reflective of that kind of base, right? And I had a question which I wanted to ask, which is, what do you really dislike about? Because I'm not saying this is wrong. I'm just curious what your thoughts are, or why you personally feel aggrieved about the Nolan Odyssey announcement.
I just hate Christopher Nolan's movies. Like,
Fair.
I
Keep going.
I just think they're shit. And like I just don't understand. I just can't I can't envision a world where he makes Odyssey successfully because Penelope doesn't die. Like in every movie, it's like it's a plot where the plot's pre-written, you know what I mean? Like there's not going to be some dramatic death of a female lead to
No, it's
spur on.
subversion.
What if he does?
Okay, but
What if
it
he
really
does?
helped. He could just erase her because he could just do all men and not talk about women.
I don't think he's gonna do all men though. Like we've seen the cast leaks already. Like they described it as a movie that's going to span, like a historical epic spanning the world or something. And I'm just
Okay, I
like,
need to get slightly mad, so please tell me the cast list.
oh, you wanna hear about the cast list?
I
Okay.
absolutely do. Please bring that up for me.
Okay, no problem. I've got you, Robert Pattinson.
Actually, we like him. He's
Is in
nuts.
there. He's
In the in
okay.
the
He's okay.
in the classical way of act is
So
being kind of nuts. He's nuts.
just picture this. So we've got Matt
Who is
Damon,
he? Okay, who's Matt Damon?
Tom Holland, Anne
No.
Hathaway.
Okay.
Zendaya's in there. She can't act. She can't
Okay.
act, by the way. She's in
She
there.
can't.
Robert Pattinson here is obviously I just mentioned. Charlize Theron is also in there, which is
Okay, this is the thing. People say Zendaya can't act. That's kind of different, right? Because even if you can't act, you can have charisma on screen. Like she has neither. It's really weird. She's like a vacuum, right?
okay.
She can't emote like a human person. It's just
Yeah,
permanent Instagram face.
it's interesting. So yeah, Charlize Theron is there, and then also Lupita Nyong'o, who is great. I respect her, but
Mhm.
like out of the cast, maybe what, like 2 out of 9? You know what I mean? Like it's just I'm not hopeful, and like
Do you know
Who was
playing
Matt
who?
Damon in this?
they haven't said who's gonna be yet. So I can't wait to find out and then be further horrified, you know?
If Odysseus. It's Bad Will Hunting.
I know, I'm sure that will be I think that'll be Robert Pattinson, surely they'll make him Odysseus, right? Like
Maybe they're different ages, young, and
Maybe,
then when he goes back to Ithaca.
maybe
oh
they
yeah.
haven't announced Chalamet yet, and Chalamet's going to come in as Odysseus.
Please.
Once again, another where they're just like, this person's the new hotness. We gotta we don't have anybody else. It's like, have you tried finding a movie star? Have you
Yeah.
tried finding people who have star power?
Have you
Question
tried
mark.
just pulling someone in off the street at this point, frankly?
I have an article cooking about like it's called I was gonna call it like well I think I'm gonna call it Cashiers du Cinema. Which is about how like it's just rich people now, and so they can't actually find the talent pool to find movie stars because people don't have like the life experience to be like the person who is the most charismatic person in the United States right now is a barista or a salesperson in a retail shop, like in a Target, and statistically they're probably not white. So if you really wanted to find somebody who had like the movie star power, like you can't draw this from people who went to a special arts school in France
Oh,
and
Musketeers.
New York. Like this is not going to be the person, right?
But yeah,
No matter how much Woody
angry
Allen
about
loves them.
the
Sorry, keep
Odyssey
going.
because I'm angry also because of the media reception it's gotten, which has been all positive because I guess people just don't watch movies anymore. Like people that work in film crit just don't have eyes anymore or something. I read an article which said that Nolan would excel at the Odyssey story because most of his famous movies are quote unquote are about a hero's journey home. In Inception, Cobb goes through dreams within dreams to get home, and in Interstellar, Cooper goes through a black hole. I'm reading verbatim from this article, by the way.
Fucking excuse me? What
Yeah.
is it? What? People can't write anymore. Anyone who wants to write good film crit, like, please get in touch with me because we are
Reading
fucking
literally
thirsty. This is so fucked.
verbatim, and I was
That's
like,
garbage.
yeah, and I'm like, cool, so that's
He
great.
writes stories about people going home. I'm sorry, Jenny. Sorry,
I
sorry.
guess,
He
yeah,
he
it's
writes
just,
story. He writes great stories about people going home, like
yeah.
Interstellar and Inception, and therefore.
Therefore, he'll be
Therefore,
great
the
at the
Odyssey is going to
Odyssey.
be really fantastic.
Yeah,
Get
within his
fucked. Get
wheelhouse.
absolutely fucked.
My
In his
dog
wheelhouse about
would have a
it's
really big reaction when I walked through the door. Does that mean that he's like the perfect audience member for Nolan? Like, what are we talking about here?
yes, is the answer. Yeah,
It's
Jesus
just
Christ.
it's just like ridiculous. Like it makes me so incensed. Like once again, like make whatever you want to make, Christopher Nolan, okay? Who gives a fuck? Like whatever. But like I just don't understand how in the past, how long have I been retired for? In the past 4 years or so, the like standard of like criticism for like art, for movie, for music, for TV, for video games has just like gone significantly like through the floor.
Yeah,
Like the
yeah.
bar is in hell now. And like the media reception for all of this stuff is just so it's like reading the Herald, right? It's like reading the Herald entertainment section
It's
right
like you,
now.
you watch the fucking monitor flatline and then it goes
Yeah,
down and you're like, wait a fucking second. That's
yeah,
not meant to happen.
Part of this is
exactly. It's just I found the
because
reception to it so bizarre. Like, of course, there were always like puff pieces in the past. There were always like people that were literally paid to say good things about things. And sure, yeah, that's always going to be around. But like, it's just complete
Everything's
dross.
grabbed, eh? Everything is fucking just like
Yeah.
over the last 4 or 5 years, capitalists have been like, actually, we just need everything.
Mhm.
Because anyone doing critique of us is a threat now. So why not, one, force everyone who's doing good stuff out of their jobs, destroy the fucking industry,
Mhm.
and two, just start auto-generating fucking articles, like pumping our slop, or
Yeah.
just hiring really useful idiots to cheerlead for us. Like it's a fucking rigged game.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
the
it makes
people
me
that get invited to these things are influencers, right? Like they're not actually. The thing is, I don't know if there are any critics that exist anymore except on like blogs or something. But the thing
letterbox.
is, to critique involves sometimes criticism, right? And you have to be able to
What?
articulate that properly.
Crazy,
Not always, but
crazy.
also like even if your critique is positive, you still have to be able to understand. I
Yeah,
mean, it seems like there is not a single person who understands the formal elements of film. I'm not joking. Do you know how many times I've read a review which says quote unquote the visuals? What does that mean? What do you mean when you say, do you mean the film itself? Like, what are the formal elements we're talking about here? If you're discussing like picture and sound, there are two different, like, you have to break that down for me. What do you mean by quote unquote the visuals? But this is the way that everything gets flattened, like you were talking about. It's identical to video game journalism, quote unquote journalism. Again, I don't know if that's
Well,
ever existed. I don't think there's
no,
ever
it
been any
has.
video
It
game
has, and
okay.
journalists.
it
There
was
was
good.
we had a golden age of it.
It was
2017 to
incredible.
2019. Rest in peace. It's gone now. Um, but yeah, it also bugs me because I think the reason why this keeps upsetting me is I'm not. It's the run-on effects of this. Like if you Google the Odyssey, like if you ignore the top two sponsored paid posts for sensory mazes called the Odyssey, the top results are: what is the Odyssey? Christopher Nolan's next movie explained. Everything we know about Christopher Nolan's
Wow.
The Odyssey. We're gonna hit a point in history whereby no one will people will grow up in a world where The
They want to attribute
Odyssey
it to Homer.
belongs to Christopher Nolan and gets attributed to Christopher Nolan.
2,000 years from now, people are going to say that's Chris.
The
We're going to have a
aliens.
screenplay. They're going to argue over Emily Wilson's woke translation of the screenplay into
Literally,
Neo
like
English.
that's what they're saying, and there are all these listicles like The Odyssey Explained, Christopher Nolan's next movie. I know that this is the SEO game, but guys, please, I beg you, I cannot deal with this anymore. My brain can't handle this. I cannot have Christopher Nolan and The Odyssey be the top trending organic keyword for The Odyssey for the next 10 years.
Well, our information space can't deal with this either. Like everything is so junked now. Like you can't find anything that you actually need. There's no real history anymore, as far as like the internet's concerned. You know, this is why Elon Musk is even going after Wikipedia now, right? Like
Mm,
it is another function of fascism to flatten out history into something that they created. Like memory politics, right?
mm,
Like these guys, like, you know, we've seen it uh in Europe, like Bandera, they're actually heroes, you know, like etc. etc. Like these or like all the American presidents, like, oh, Jimmy Carter, the greatest US president, he's dead now, by the way. And you're like, yeah, but he also fucking okayed like these fucking massacres, right? Like he also was the preceding president who set the stage for neoliberalism under Reagan. Like
mm.
there are no good US presidents, and this everyone is so desperate to myth make, and even on the left.
Yeah,
And
what's really funny is that Nixon was the last New Deal president, right? Like you
it's
wouldn't think,
cooked.
yeah, given how much liberals use him as like the byword for Hitler, right? Like, Nixon is the cipher for Trump in Spielberg's movies because that's how he grew up, you know?
Mm.
Yeah, and when you're playing into that, when you're taking part in that same myth making as a progressive, you are just conditioning people to accept it when the Fash does it. Like, we don't have to do it. We don't have to go, oh, well, you have to take the good things so people know there's something good to fight for. No, you don't. You can be honest about it and say, and we should fight for something good.
I'm just thinking about woke Nixon.
Lord Nixon.
All right, girlies. Here's what's problematic about Reductress.
Horrible. Yeah, and I'm sure I've seen recently as well, at least a
When
couple
the
of bits of
president does it, it
discourse.
is not problematic.
At least a couple of bits of discourse which are like people not knowing that there was an original text. Like that's already happening like
Yeah.
at pace. Yeah.
They're all
And
tech
not
guys
even
as
not even
well.
about the Odyssey. Not even about the Odyssey. Just about a range of different shit. About Nosferatu, right? Like, oh, remake of the fucking other film. Like, no, it was actually a book, etc., etc.
I just watched that last night and I have thoughts.
Are they good thoughts?
It's the Joker of
Oh my
Nosferatu.
Yeah, I've heard it. Like,
I'm not saying it's bad because it's well constructed. Robert Eggers is a craftsman, but like, did we really need to flesh out all of these characters and write a new ones? It's like somebody who really like. I get that he's a fanboy of the original, but he's written his own fanfic about it in the sense of like, you know, writing backstories for characters and fleshing out like this person and that person who appears for 2 seconds in the original. And then he's like, well, actually, we need to understand like what their background is. And you're like, do we?
Yeah.
Does this need to be 2.5 hours long?
This is another really
Question
good
mark.
example of like the hype is just it never is correct anymore.
This
Everyone's
could have been a
fucking poisoned.
17-minute
Everyone's
movie.
gone.
Like this shouldn't have been a feature-length movie.
Yeah.
Which is
Oops.
fine. And we should have more movies that are like, you know,
Yeah.
70 to 80 minutes, right?
But they
And that
shouldn't
would
be
have
held
been
up as
great.
like the fucking greatest thing that's ever been made.
I
right?
don't like that people are saying like, oh, this is the return of the new Hollywood kind of thing. You know, this is finally we're getting out of the Marvel slop. And you're like, did you know that Nosferatu was a remake? Like, this is just another remake. This is not getting us
This
out
is
of
what I
the.
mean.
People are like, it's so good that an auteur is successful. And you're like, okay, but like the last original thing that he did was The Lighthouse, right? Like, as far as I know, that's not an adaptation. It's like The Northman is Hamlet. And then this one is also just a remake. So, like, what are we doing here? Right? Like, if you're much wanted auteurs of that, and this is the thing about the collapse between people who are fans and everybody who is in fandom, and this includes like quote unquote film Twitter, because you're a fan of the cinema in general. Like, you're not actually engaging with this in an artistic sense. Really, you're a fanboy, right? And you exhibit the same behaviors as anybody in fandom, the same neuroses as well, which is that fans collapse their interests with those of executives, and they talk like executives, right? So you get people who are, you know, I don't know, anti-Disney Star Wars or something like that, being like, you know, watch the profit margins fall on this, and you're like, why do you care about that? I don't understand. And this is the same thing here, where people will say, I don't know, somebody got mad at me because they didn't love Avatar 2, and I was like, okay. But they're like, can't you be like happy that there's like an auteur who's making billions of dollars? And I was like, well, first of all, like, no, because I'm not making that money. And secondly, like like if he wants to do like fanfic about his weird like blue alien fetish, his cat people fetish, like I respect that on a certain level, but it's still like underwritten by Disney. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't understand why I'm supposed to be cheering this on, that like this isn't a Marvel movie and therefore it's good. It's like, this is still like cards on the table. I did a little bit on the set of the sequels because they shot them all at once, and like there was nothing but blue everywhere. And if that's the future of filmmaking, I'm going to shoot myself in the head, because they were the worst 14-hour days I've ever done in my fucking life. Like, this shit, it's bad. It's so bad. Like, it's just depressing and horrible. Like, you are disoriented all the time on this stuff. And I don't know if what you're making is art. I really don't. In some sense it is, but in some sense it's just like really expensive, really complicated AI slop that you are doing, like screensavers, you know, which I just have a problem with. And I'm not going to say that this is, you know, it's amazing and it's the return to form of the art form, because like, I don't care if Jim Cameron made $1 billion on a movie. I really don't. What I care about is if the 100 good New Zealand scripts that are coming out every year don't get made because we're giving a couple of $100 million to Amazon to make one season of a show and then bugger off, right? Like, I care about that, because Avatar is one movie. We could be having a proliferation of many of them in the development of the art form, right? And we could see so many different things that aren't just, as Ginny says, purely reflective of the time and the culture as it exists now. Like, tell me why it is that the only indigenous stories that can get told about New Zealand are like, they are historical, or they are about like tragic suffering, or they are, this person is a clown for the white people, like the Taika Waititi thing. Right? Why are those the only stories that can be told? You know?
Yeah, it's that same I've talked about
And
this.
if you look at the board of the New Zealand Film Commission, you'll find the answer to that.
Wow, lucky. Yeah, it's the same kind of mechanism, I guess, that we've talked about in regards to politics, where the center or the soft progressive feeds cookies to something that does a good job once or twice, right? Like, oh, like, we should celebrate it when this right-wing guy says one nice thing about the gays, right? Like, give him some pats on the head. Like, no, you're just gonna run out of cookies because they're just fucking gaming you. And like, you don't need to like fucking put your money up to support stuff that is one micro iota better than the overall movement of either the political or cultural landscape. Like you're not actually shifting anything. What you're telling the people creating these things and what you're telling the capital is that you're going to put your money up and you're going to give your resource for a fucking like wink and a nudge, right? Like it's you're not moving anything. You're not doing anything. You're like you think if you give like David Seymour enough cookies, he's gonna fucking turn like do a liberal turn. Like you think he's gonna be less fascist, or he's gonna take those cookies and like feed them to his fucking fascist hordes, right?
He's been
Like
training his whole life in the 500 times gravity chamber to get more racist.
yeah, it's sad, and I like people. No, I was gonna say people will realize it. It'll be too late, but I don't know if they even will.
David Seymour's on his way to Namek right now, concocting new slurs for Namekians.
I have that on good authority. But we got that as a leak from inside David Seymour's office.
You're right. This is the McCain thing, right? Where he was like, no, ma'am, Obama's not an Arab. He's a good man. It's like, this is celebrated by liberal papers
you got
at
to
the time.
hand it to McCain, right? No, you don't.
Did you hear what he actually said? And also, like, you don't have to hand it to McCain, like, and because he can't hand it to you. I mean, like, say what you will about McCain, but like, I hope that his arms also don't work in hell, so he can't salute Hitler. You know, like, you don't have to hand it to them. No. You don't have to do a Philip. If you're gonna do a Philip, think to yourself and say no.
I agree, but let's pivot. Let's do a hard pivot. Imperialism returning home. It's happening. It happened twice, kind of three times. In the US, what are they called? Like, there's some really interesting language used about these two ex-US soldiers. One who drove a vehicle into a crowd of New Year's celebrators, and the other one who filled a Tesla with fireworks and then shot himself. What are they called? They're called like high-powered, like US military or something like that. It was
highly decorated.
Yeah, just like so bizarre. One of them like was flying an ISIS flag. I don't know what is happening here. It just the really frustrating thing to me is that it seems with just how with who is targeted, normal people, and like the performativeness of it, like it really just lends itself to like the fucking conspiracy false flag stuff. And I'm not saying that it is that, but it's just ripe for that, and it's really frustrating because I just don't think we'll know like exactly what happened here. Other than
I am saying that, I think specific detail, and in the end doesn't matter. Like if Fort Bragg is just kind of producing psychos, and that's kind of what happens, right? Like this ends up at the same thing, but the idea is to ultimately have it be the same. And I think that for anybody who is confused about how this sort of mechanism works, I really encourage reading histories of Operation Gladio, of the Years of Lead, and a number of other sort of stay-home clandestine operations that happened in Europe in the 20th century to try to suppress the sort of communist parties there. Because until recently, the United States sort of hadn't had for over 50 years like anything resembling a kind of actual left, right? And so now that we have seen that arisen, and I think I don't want people to memory hold it in 2020, like, police precinct was burned down in Minneapolis, that like, there was the, as much as you might call it like chuggy or cringe or something, the sort of Chaz or Chop or whatever, like autonomous region that popped up in Seattle, of people who wanted to have essentially like a Paris Commune and did it really badly, but like they would, it was there, the spirit was there, right? And I think that this is a direct kind of reaction from the American security state. And they've been brewing this for a long time. I mean, like Aberration in the Heartland of the Real about Timothy McVeigh and about like how these sort of people get cultivated, right? And the intent is essentially you don't have to get people to carry out a plan. You just have to kind of crazy make them enough and put a bomb in their hands, yeah? And as a side note, I think it's really funny that Elon Musk makes such bad cars that people couldn't tell whether or not the Tesla just did that. But when you have influencers being like, we're going to do, well, I don't know if they're influencers, but, like quote unquote journalists who are essentially the same thing, because of the collapse of everything together now, going through, this like decorated former soldier's home, and we're going to show you, and look, there's an ISIS flag and a keffiyeh is hanging up. It's like, this is an op. Like, how stupid do you think we are? Genuinely, how stupid do you think people are that they're just going to be like, oh my gosh, a keffiyeh, like all of our enemies are your enemies, the state. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. And it's like when the New
We're
York
gonna
Times
swear blind obedience. Please protect me, Big Daddy.
when the New York Times has copy ready to go, like, oh, Lebanon and Gaza might be like the hostilities might spread to the US, and you're like, Lebanon and Gaza? What the fuck are you talking about? Are you fucking kidding me? Like, clearly there was meant to be something more that happened before they ran this fucking story, because this is not sufficient.
They're trying to make the connections now. They're like, again, going through his home and like whether or not he actually had that stuff or it was staged, it was an op. Like, it doesn't matter because you've got journalists kind of coming through and being like, look, Palestinian stuff. And you're like, this is
Yeah.
just so obvious. Come on. Like,
Well,
just
and the
making
thing
the
is,
jerk off motion endlessly.
they
Like, how stupid do they think people are? And the answer is very stupid because they're trying to defund education.
woohoo. But they've just supported ISIS, an ex-ISIS guy, to like fucking take over Syria. Like you can't keep doing this.
No, and people understand those things now. Like, I think it's not hugely well known, but at least it is like a fact which is out there and about that. For example, Israel was assisting ISIS by giving medical assistance to fighters when they were coming basically for R&R to Israel. Because ISIS was causing and sowing chaos with their enemies, and so Israel was like, yeah, we'll give them support.
Well, Al-Jilani's
And
just
yet
had
they
an
will, rhetorically say, Hamas ISIS is,
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, like as
So
they eviscerate children.
this is the same
right?
thing in the US, right? And like similarly, Al-Jilani, the head of the HTS, who is now taken over Syria, had an interview just the other day where it was like, oh yeah, the reason we did this was to stop a wider war in the region, so that like Iran didn't get involved, kind of thing. He's like, wait, excuse me, I thought it was meant to be to free Syria. Like, are you fucking kidding me? Like they're just doing it incredibly openly and then relying on the fifth column via like the establishment legacy media to meaning make a new reality around what has actually happened. And just doing it like completely out in
And
the open for
because
the record. Like everyone can see this happening. It's and they don't care. It doesn't matter to them anymore.
there's a kind of narrow casting because they know that the people who read the New York Times, it's not like the agenda setting media for the nation anymore, for all persons. It's only a narrow band of persons who read that. And so other people will exclusively read Breitbart or, whatever, patriotnews.biz, .president, .gay exists, right? And so I think they know that, you can have the same set of facts or the same things said by member of the State Department in a press conference, and then the New York Times will report it one way, and then patriotnews.gay will report it another way. And so they're aware that that they can just say totally different things about what happened and just invent reality, to kind of draw on Parenti's term for that, right? Like it's just inventing reality that they can do. There's no longer this necessity to maintain a kind of national illusion where there is a single story about it consistently, because people are audiences for a narrow band of news and they don't cross over to another band of news. But I think what's interesting about that is that they sort of don't count on the fact that because all of this information is available to people, it's not like you just subscribe to this one paper and not another paper. Everything is available online, and so we can compare and contrast. In fact, there is a handy Twitter account, I don't know if it still exists, called Editing the Grey Lady, which shows you all of the edits that the New York Times makes on its website in real time. And you can watch them change headlines to be more or less in line with, this or that particular kind of US state agenda, or otherwise in response to some kind of cultural backlash. It's quite fascinating. So you can kind of see that news being rewritten and reality being rewritten in real time. And all of these things exist, and people are able, even if you exclusively read, like, I don't know, Counterpunch or something like that, you can also read the New York Times if you want, or you can read patriotnews.biz.gay.
Yeah, and it's like, this is not, we're talking about the US a lot today, but there's a trickle-down effect, and the people doing that over there act as a framework, act as a model for our own people of a similar ilk. And we've seen that accelerate here, with stuff basically openly tying itself to a quite like right-wing political vehicle under claims that they're helping local democracy or whatever, right? Like, yeah. And then, you mentioned as well, Simone, like the way in which film gets funded here, right? Like only particular narratives get funded. We're very like in many ways, we are a much less free society even than the United States because we're so small and we're so easy to like turn the tap on or off for a particular set of ideas.
Yeah, I was talking recently with the lead actor of a short film that I'm doing at the moment, and he's Tuhoy, and he had like some differing opinions about, and like he's entitled to, right? Like differing opinions about Toi Tiriti, but in particular about like um what sort of film parts he can get and how he can get a domestic violence person, or he can get the funny clown, but he doesn't want to do that.
Yeah.
And he didn't say it for like a cultural reason. I'm not putting words in his mouth where he was like, oh, these are the only kinds of narratives that Indigenous people are allowed to do. But he was just kind of sick of it for the reason that he's like, well, look, other people have done that. Like Billy T. James has done that. Why should I do it? Taika Waititi's done that. Why should I do that? I should do something more interesting. I should do something different, right? And like, so doing something just very different scripts where it's like this was just written for a human person, and he happens to bring like his experience to it, right, and interpret that role in different ways. Or you can have Indigenous stories that aren't about those very narrow things. And it is a struggle, I think, for a lot of people who don't hold the keys to the kingdom out there, because the New Zealand art scene is so incestuous. For the people who are on the boards and on like the charity things, right? Like you say, New Zealand is so small, and I think that's a big part of it. I was kind of turning over in my mind why it is we have duopolies. Like there's the supermarket duopoly, there's like the newspaper duopoly, and I think it is that same thing as the reason there are two parties in the United States, like the Julius Nyerere thing, right? But with typical America has one party, but with typical extravagance, it has two of them, right? And I think that this is the case here. It's like what Bertrand Russell said about how in the English-speaking world there's an obsession with political parties being the expression of democracy, which is really funny. Like it's really odd that this particular thing which arose out of the county system in England in the 19th century, when barely anyone could vote, is seen as the paragon of democracy, and therefore we've got to spread like other political parties elsewhere. And so like the more parties you have, the like, I don't know, more democracy there is, or something like that. It's weird, right? But you've got to have at least two of them. Like one party state bad, two party state good. You've got to have at least two of them, and this is just how it works. And I think that this is the same here. Like the supermarket duopoly is like, not to draw on that stupid meme, but like the illusion of choice, right? Like it doesn't matter whether you get it from New World or from they're the same thing, Countdown, or from Pack and Save. Like no, it doesn't. It doesn't matter if you read it on Stuff or on the Herald. Well, no, it doesn't. These reporters will go to the same press conferences. They all like relatively know each other. Like a lot of them go to the same dinner parties. It kind of doesn't matter, but it's there to convince you that there is some kind of diversity in thought, that we don't have an extremely narrow bounded set of kind of illusory constructs that we call news. And that's the purpose of it, that in a country this small, it wouldn't do to have a single one. I mean, I remember it was the Commerce Commission was stopping some of these media mergers and saying like, no, we need to have, at least two of these things. And this is true, but why two? Like, why is it that we can't have local reporting? Why is it that for economic reasons you can't have like somebody who actually talks to local interests for this? Why does it have to be owned by a big Australian media group or something?
Yeah.
Or by a news corporation which is largely owned by private equity in the United States? Why is that the case? Why can we not have journalism? Why are we not allowed journalism, right? Like, why can't there actually be a kind of freedom of thought and a freedom of information gathering or assembly? And the answer is just, these are all necessary things to maintain the really ramshackle ship of Theseus we got going here, called the nation state. It's real rickety in a settler colony, right? Like, because
I was going to say it's more like trying to maintain the colony more than the nation state for us in our particular case, right?
Yeah, but the contradictions between those things sort of threaten to tear each other apart. Like liberal democracy, or rather like democracy itself, is in total contradiction to capitalism. So those two things are always tearing at each other. And, liberalism is at odds with the violence of colonialism. And so those two, like ostensibly at least, and so those two things are kind of tearing each other apart. I don't mean actually, but like in terms of what they're supposed to be, right? And so there is just, and the idea of a nation state that doesn't accord, like that 19th century confection, like the invention of like the German as a person or the Italian as a single person, is at total odds with having at minimum a quote unquote bicultural society, if Te Papa is to be believed, right? Like those two things are in contradiction with each other. There's kind of like, I guess you could call them like dialectical contradictions if you wanted to, are always trying to tear each other apart. And so you need to have these illusions through news media to create this cohesive whole. And they need to be in lockstep with each other. Otherwise, there are real problems on our hands. And it needs to be the case that not to, okay, I'm going to digress a little bit. I'm so sorry because Ginny hasn't spoken that much. There is this kind of classical problem. I guess we might call it like Hume's paradox, right? Which is like that in politics, or rather in like political economics and the society at large, if you have a small group of people who tend to be staffed in the positions where they own the society and they don't run everything through their labor, but they make the managerial decisions for the society, and the great swath of people underneath them, the sort of bewildered herd, right? If those people outnumber them, why is it that they allow themselves to be ruled? This is the kind of problem from the children's movie Ants, right? If everybody remembers Kevin Spacey's speech as a grasshopper in that, about like, well, if one of the ants realizes that they outnumber us 100-1, it's over. The question is, why do people submit to that sort of rule? And there are a lot of answers to that. And the fascist answer is that, like, some people, like, one, hierarchy is good. Two, some people are naturally subordinate. And of course, hierarchy is so natural that we have to enforce it constantly by violence and by lying and deceit. That's how you know that it's natural and normal for humans to be in hierarchy, by the way. And so if you look at that first level of analysis, there are a couple of answers to it, right? And the classical, like in the Aristotelian answer to it is, well, you can do it by tyranny, or you can do it by giving treats to people, treatlerism, right? Like turn them into little Hitlers through treats. This kind of bread and circuses, like what Jenny was talking about earlier. So there are two different ways that you can resolve this, right? And what's really curious is that in New Zealand, we have neither. Like, we do have violence. There is the violence of the state, but it's not as extreme as, say, an active war zone for most people. And so I don't want to discount that things could be a lot worse, and are getting worse in respect of state violence, right? But we also don't necessarily have like the treats, right? Like, life is getting harder and harder and harder for people. So how do you do it? Well, you have to engage the kind of complex levers and instruments of media control and thought control in a society. That's the necessary way in which you must resolve that sort of Humean paradox. And I think it's necessary for us to understand that the opulence of a minority being protected against a kind of increasingly immiserated majority, for whom the policies of the state act as subtrahend to their class interests, is through this kind of two-party system. It is necessary for that to be the case, for that thought control. It is necessary for people to believe that if Labour's been in for a while and life's not getting any better, let's give the other guys a chance. Let's vote national. Like, the idea that this has to be the case, or even for people, and I don't mean to let third-party people off the hook, but even for people who are big greenies, the idea that if the Greens got 50%, then New Zealand would be solved, is also a thought control fiction, right? Because it doesn't resolve all of these contradictions that lie at the heart of the state itself, and how our citizenry works, and how the original sin of this country works. Like, the settlement of New Zealand itself cannot be resolved that way.
And you should all think about that as we move into 2025 and we see things start to slowly unwind. I guess last question before we go. Is Winston Peters going to collapse the government around the middle of the year? What do we think?
Is Winston Peters going to collapse around the middle of the year?
That could also happen.
We
He's
talked
already
about this
collapsing around the
yesterday.
middle.
I think it would be funny. Is it possible? Like, is it legitimately going to happen? I don't know. Okay, it is possible, but I just don't know if it's feasible. It would be hilarious. But I think that it would be something that would happen. Like, it would be like it feels like a cut your nose off to spite your face situation. But I genuinely believe that I think he could have or maybe has already reached a stage whereby he's old enough to be subsisting on like pure ego and living a lifestyle where he just like exists to serve his every like impulsive need. In which case, yes, he could, and would be well within his rights to. But surely there are, there's caretakers in place, right? Surely there's someone that can stop him. I don't.
The thing is, it's kind of hard to know what he's going to do because it's always just in self-interest, but who knows what his interpretation of self-interest is, right? Like, I don't know if that's the maverick move or whether the maverick move is sitting it out until the end, because he does, like, I don't want to say believes in the way that our institution operates with its transfer of power, but it's served him very well. And so, like, there's no reason for him to cause a constitutional crisis. I think the other alternative, if he doesn't do that right, is wait it out until the end of the term and then just do what he did with, the thing with Labour, where he was part of the early pandemic response and then turned around and kind of did a salt to the cookers, where he was like, let's have an inquiry about like what I did. What? Just stuff that just doesn't make sense, right? To then turn to the other side and be like, I was actually the outlying maverick in the Labour government, and I went up to Jacinda Ardern and I shook my finger and said, cut it out. And so he could do that here, where he says, like, I was the voice of reason, but it's time for me to break with National. I'm running on my own here now in this election because, ACT did a lot of stuff wrong. And David Seymour is, deserves to get hit in the face or something. I don't know, whatever he wants to say. So he could still do that. Like, he can cast it however he wants and still, like, wait out the term. But as you say, he is getting a lot older. Like, maybe he thinks he's got very few chances left to just kind of,
have some fun.
And his appeal, and I talk to people who are New Zealand First supporters, is they say, oh, he likes to stir the pot. And it's like, do you believe in the policies? Well, I don't know what the policies are, but like, he likes to stir things up. And so he's like, even though he's a mainstay politician, he's the perfect politician for people who hate politicians, right? Who are like, they're all the same, but they don't have any other analysis beyond that. They just have a kind of gut feeling that they're being scammed, which they are. And he's the person for that.
If you listen to this, Winston Peters, you hear that. People like that you're the wild card. And what is a more wild card move? Ensuring that David Seymour never gets to be Deputy Prime Minister. All right.
Never let them know your next move. He's just going to die partway through the term.
No. Did
you just say no to Winston Peters dying? Why do you care?
Oh, no. Just no to the conversation continuing.
Kyle's had enough.
Sorry.
That's been the first episode of 2025. 1 of 200 is continuing throughout the year. And then probably leading into 2026 when we get another fucking election.
So good.
I think we've got a couple of elections coming up this year. We've got Canada probably and Australia. We're going to try and do some stuff around those. That should be very fun. Please click the Patreon link in the summary. Join us, give us some money, help us do things. There's so much we want to do, but we need resource to do that. We can't only operate on the free labor of me and my co-hosts. We actually need to pay people sometimes, and also the internet overlords to host our stuff. So
I thought I was being paid in stock buybacks.
Oh yeah, that's what you're being paid in. So like, share, subscribe, spread the word, let people know that there is some good media out there. And we'll catch you next week or whenever we decide to do another episode. Thank you very much to my co-hosts, Simone.
If you would like to pay me, send me a pom-pom pudding.
Fantastic. And thank you, Ginny.
Thanks. Don't send me plushies. Thanks for having me on, Kyle.
All right.
No, what you're supposed to say is don't send Simone plushies.
Look, if you want to be paid in cotton balls, that's your prerogative. Who am I to stop you?
And thank you to our audience. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll catch you next time.
If artifice is art, then I'm living a pointless life, but I'm learning all your lessons. Fucking politics, there's no distinction. The words upon now is paid with good intentions. And I'll admit that I'm at a loss for what to say when they criticism cost me ought to stay. I live amongst the people every day in this vindictive, forgetful fucking race.